The next phase worth looking at takes place in the early 1940s. So we're now looking at a time where fully 3 of the 6 forms of money that had previously existed and even been made in the early 1930s and late 20s are no longer, or only half of them are remaining. By this point, the gold certificates, the Federal Reserve banknotes, and the national banknotes, with their yellow seals for the gold certificates and brown seals, large or small, for the other 2, have gone away and been gone for at least the better part of a decade or so. We're now down to only 3 remaining types of money, as one can see. The silver certificate, always represented with a blue seal. The United States note, always represented with the red seal. And the Federal Reserve note, represented with the green seals. So, just take a look at how this goes, because still, at this time, you still have about 3 dimensions of real interest in terms of the kinds of money that we had. First of all, we have not only that there's still the 3 different kinds of money we just indicated, but also, being the wartime, we have the wartimes note, and we're starting to take a look at some of that here. And then also, one other thing still going on at that time, but soon to change, was the fact of the large denominations. Now, taking a look at these 3 silver certificates, you see here the normal blue seal $1 silver certificate. Now, all of these are from what could be called the second or last Julian and Morgenthau era. The next series letter, in any case, would be accompanied with a different set of signatures, or at least one of them will be different. So, yeah, we move on to Vincent, I believe, instead of Julian, or Morgenthau. He places one of those. But anyway, so this being the second one, 35A. This was the normal dollar that we would have seen stateside. In North Africa, however, mostly soldiers there, stationed there, and maybe some other Americans living there for whatever reason, they were given a different kind of paper money that, as you can see, would have been similar in all respects, except that the seal is yellow. So we're bringing back a color that hadn't been seen since 1933 on the old gold certificates. So, interestingly enough, however, unlike the gold certificates where everything was kind of a goldish yellow, it's a somewhat yellowish yellow, but it's pretty close. The serial numbers are in the dark blue color. And so it makes for a rather colorful kind of note, where here everything's the same color, the dark blue. And then we also had another one for Hawaii, where you see everything of that kind, the seal, and the serial numbers are in brown ink. But you also have other changes here. You have the word Hawaii printed on here, and printed on here. And the really cool part is that the reverse. Now, coming into the era of 1935, the $1 got a new reverse that's much more familiar to those who are who use the American currency even to this day. That's when we got this appearance, which has been around since 1935, and is almost identical to what you see today, except this area is blank, where now it will say, "In God We Trust," so they don't have that. So that's one difference. The Hawaii one has the one additional difference, is that you've got the word Hawaii written in these big hollow letters. So that's pretty cool. Now, these 2 existed because, as I said, there was a war going on, and there was a genuine fear that the Japanese might take over Hawaii, or that the Nazi Germans might take over in North Africa, and if they were to grab not only a people, but a bunch of their money, they could use their American money maybe to buy American weapons and things of that nature, or manipulate American markets in various ways. And it was great to be able to just be in a position where we could just, if that happened in North Africa, we could just demonetize with a stroke of the pen all our yellow seal American money. Or if it happened, if the Japanese took over Hawaii, we could just demonetize all our brown seal paper money, just like that. So that's why that had to be like that. Well, that's the $1. Let's see what happened with the next denomination. The next denomination up was simply the $2. Now, remember, the United States note was a fiat currency. It's not officially backed by anything. It can, of course, be supported by anything, silver, gold, just coins that could even be base metal coins, and held by various kinds of securities and other forms of collateral. But the bottom line was it's really fiat money. And the one thing that sets the United States note apart from the Federal Reserve note is who controls the amount of these things that exist. So, in the case of the United States note, it's Congress. Congress decides to either raise or lower the amount of the total number of dollars of this kind in our economy. And so by doing that, this limits it and keeps it from just becoming wildly anything it wants to be. And it also has the advantage that with the Congress, only elected officials are making this kind of determination. The downside being is that if you want to change this, it literally takes an act of Congress, which hadn't happened since May 3, 1878. At that particular time, Congress settled upon a total dollar value of this form of money in the amount of $346,681,016. They never changed it again. And so that was the total number of United States notes in circulation from that time until they did away with the format in early 1971. Well, in a way, they kind of continued until somewhere in the 1990s, but they were locked away in a vault and none were available, but they were kept in that vault. They called this circulation, but it wasn't circulating until finally they just did away with it and destroyed everything in the vault. So that was the end of the United States note. But at any rate, the $2 denomination was never terribly in demand, and that's why they made these not only in 2s and in 5s. And, and a very brief experiment with a $1, but that was kind of silly, and they did away with that within a month. So, and that had been also about 10 years previous. So, now in this case, you notice the series number is 28D. The Julian and Morgenthau would be 28C and D, because we're going with the second. That's why it has D. When we move up to the next denomination, the $5, we'll see that the series letter is one behind. We'll talk about that. Now, the only other thing we can look at here, this note is a legal tender at its face value for all debts, public and private. And the United States of America will pay to the bearer on demand $2. And we look at the back here. And there is Jefferson's house, the Monticello, and just like on the back of a nickel, and Jefferson's on the front. Kind of interesting how that went. Now we move up to the next denomination, $5. Now 5 is kind of intriguing. We actually have fully 5 different kinds of $5 bills during World War II. So let's take a look at all this. This is kind of extreme, but it just goes to show how much there is. Okay, let's start with our 3 basic varieties. We have Federal Reserve notes, we have silver certificates, and we have the United States notes. So looking at the Federal Reserve notes, you can see their familiar green seals. You can see Federal Reserve note. The United States of America will pay to the bearer on demand $5. So that's always the same. Again, we're on the second Julian and Morgenthau, which in this denomination is always in 1934A. Well, that goes for both the Federal Reserve notes and also for the silver certificates. The United States notes, however, we're still on series 1928. And as you can see, this is 1928C, which is one letter behind the 28D for the $2 United States note, because the $5 was initiated a whole series letter later, so it's always one series letter behind. It's still the second instance of Julian and Morgenthau, and when we get to a 28D, the signatures are different. So let's take a look at this a little more here. So this is what they had in Hawaii. Well, this is the state side. They had this for most of your $5. You had the silver certificates that were all backed with actual silver on hand somewhere. And then you had the United States note. So the silver certificate is still backed with actual silver, maybe silver dollars, or at least silver coins of like face value, enough to redeem the full face value of all silver certificates out in circulation. So, where the Federal Reserve note, they're backed with various money, but they cannot pay it all at once. They're banking on the fact that most people will just take these papers and just use that and not ask for the paper to be turned into some kind of, well, in this case, it would have to be silver or at least some kind of coins. I mean, yeah, you could $5 worth of nickels or pennies, I suppose, but, that'd be a lot. So anyway, there's the familiar green seal. But again, for Hawaii, there we have all the same print, except that the seal and the numbers are brown. You have Hawaii printed at each end. And, of course, the interesting, neat part is on the back. You have the word Hawaii printed all the way across it. It's interesting how this matches sort of the Lincoln pennies that have been seen from 1959 to 2008, where you had Lincoln on the front, and then you had the Lincoln Memorial on the back. So that's kind of an odd little nexus there between the 2 and the 5. So the silver certificate, of course, is the whole different basis here. This certifies that there is on deposit in the Treasury of the United States of America $5 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. So that's a whole different statement. And notice here, now unlike the $1, where for some reason the little number in this corner of it was just gray, for the $5 and the $10 silver certificate, it's actually given the same color as the serial number, and in this case also the seal. Now, and of course the back is nothing different. But when we go for the North Africa note, the 5 is still blue, the serial numbers are still blue, the seal, as you can see, is yellow. So they're all series 1934A. In this case, there's nothing different on the back. But one other small thing I've done here, the Hawaiian Federal Reserve notes with the brown seals are all from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, California, whereas the other regular ones come from all 12 banks. For this little set here, I'm always using San Francisco, California for all Federal Reserve notes, just as a kind of small minor consistency, and that means these serial numbers are in the same system of serial numbers. Finally, you get over here, the United States note. We're on Series 28C, and here it's United States of America will pay to the bearer on demand $5, just like on the Federal Reserve note. So the big difference being with Federal Reserve, the money supply is controlled by a group of bankers, an unelected group of bankers, I might add. So on the one hand, I guess you could say that gives you a lot more flexibility to respond to situations that may require changes in the money supply. The downside is it puts it in the hands of these bankers to manipulate that at will if they wanted, and at times to profit from being able to do that. So, or to inflate the money just pretty much almost arbitrarily. So anyway, that was 5, and as you can see, there were 5 different kinds, and all the different colors here, because you got green for that, you got blue, and you got red for that, and both the old colors, yellow and brown, have been revived for this wartime use. So that really covers a lot. There are, of course, in the United States notes, no higher denomination, at least it's so far, than $5, whereas at least the silver certificate will go up to $10. Now we move to the next denomination, and that's the $10. So now we're done looking at United States notes, but we still have the Federal Reserve notes, and we have the silver certificates. And once again, you have the same color combinations, the same everything. Green seal and numbers for the Federal Reserve note used stateside. And again, this is a San Francisco bank. It's usual familiar reverse. There's just no "In God We Trust," otherwise it's identical to what would have been seen throughout the rest of the 20th century. Most of it. They have the brown seal and serial numbers with Hawaii printed at each end and in hollow letters on the back for the Hawaiian version. Okay, then you also had $10 silver certificates, some that circulated stateside, and they have blue for everywhere. Again, you have a blue 10, blue serial numbers, and the blue state seal. But the difference here is for North Africa, while you maintain the blue 10 and the blue serial numbers, the seal itself is yellow. So that, again, and no real exciting difference on the back side. These are just how these $10 have looked. Okay, so now we only have these two different kinds. And in the small size money, $10 was the biggest denomination the silver certificate ever came in. So after this, we are done with silver certificates, but we still have the Federal Reserve notes in both regular and Hawaii versions. So that still is of some interest. Okay, and moving up to the next denomination, we go up to the 20. Well, now we're down to just Federal Reserve notes, but that's what we're doing in Hawaii. We therefore can have and do have a special Hawaii version. Again, there's the stateside version, green seal, green numbers, and of course, as always, this is San Francisco, 34A. And there's the brown seal, also 34A, brown numbers, brown seal, Hawaii on each side. And on the reverse side, the White House, or just White House, and somewhat smaller trees. That would be changed in the middle of Series 1934C to somewhat bigger trees, and the caption there was saying "The White House." Anyway, other than that, this is pretty much the same. You see the big Hawaii and the hollow letters. Now, one other thing that occurs to me of interest here, these have all been 1934A on Julian Morgenthau. The the wartime notes, not all of them are 34A, or in the case of the $1, 35A. Well, the $1 they are all 35A, but in the $5, the Hawaiian one has both a 34 without an A and a 34 with an A. The one without is slightly rare, but not very much. And then at $10, only the North African note exists both with and without the A. In that case, the North African $10 silver certificate without the A, just 34, is actually very unusual. That was a very small run, and they're quite valuable, in the thousands of dollars at least. And then when you get to the $20 denomination, once again, 34A is the commonest. There's also 34 without an A. That's just the slightest bit less common than the 34A. And so that's kind of interesting to see how that goes. Anyway, now we're done with all the special monies as far as different kinds of money, silver certificates, United States notes, and also the wartime money. But now we begin to move into the third. Now, the first set I had only went into the denominations that were coming out at the very, very first in 1929, which only included $1, $2, $5, $10, and $20. The second set I had, I just cut it off at 20, even though, in fact, both gold certificates and Federal Reserve notes are featured in denominations all the way up to $10,000, or as we would see from the specimen sets, the sample sets that I looked at in the third video, the gold certificate even briefly ascended all the way to $100,000. So those are the big denominations, but that's the end of gold certificates. Now only the Federal Reserve notes are left, but we can at least cover most of this. We can go here, $50, so that's getting bigger, 34A, San Francisco, green seals, and it's all the same. And here it says 50, where it might have said gold, and the gold certificate ones. The back, however, is what we would expect for the $50 bill, the capital. Then we move on to the $100, and it too exists in 1934A. Federal Reserve note, very familiar. And this one's got the Independence Hall on the back. Okay. Now, we're looking at Series 34A, which pretty much coincides with the latter part of World War II. And we're finding out that this is the last stage in which anything more than $100 ever gets printed. So we get to 34A for the $500, and there it is. There's McKinley. It's also a Federal Reserve note. All the verbiage is the same. Green seal, green serial numbers, all the will pay to the bearer on demand. Well, that's the same. And McKinley is who's on the $500 bill. So that's kind of cool. And on the back, we see that once we get as high as $500, no more buildings on the back. Just United States of America, $500, and lots of 500s with their scroll work and lace work. So that becomes a new and different look. And then we can continue even higher. Also, 34A, or the second Julian Morgenthau, there's even 1,000. And here now, there's Grover Cleveland on the front. Still, you got the green letters and seal, and 34A. This is also San Francisco, California, United States of America, will pay to the bearer on demand $1,000. Oof, we got a little rip on this one, which is probably why I could get this for as cheap as I did, which is still quite a bit more than face, about double or slightly less. And here we go, United States of America, $1,000, and lots of 1,000 scroll work and lace work, but no more buildings. And the same trend continues for the 5,000 and 10,000, which obviously, though they do exist, but not as 34A. There's a tiny number of 34A, 5,000 and 10,000 printed, and also 34Bs. Both of those are so small and so rare that no specimens of either are known to exist. So they basically end with just 34 for all intents and purposes, and is a 1928 series for those denominations. I showed pictures of the 5,000 in both kinds, 28 and 34, and I had a 28 10,000, just to kind of show what the notes would be, but those were just simulations. Now, even these denominations, this wasn't quite the end. You have the same kind of trail off in that you have 1934A, also 34B and 34C. And again, both of those were printed in such minuscule numbers, and none are known to have survived. But there were some printed. And the same with 1000, 34B, 34. Well, it's 34C. There were no 34Bs for whatever reason. But none of the 34Cs are known to have survived either. So that's this next period, and it's kind of neat to at least sample a little bit the higher denominations that would never be printed again.